Mini episode 930 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode number 930. We got a special treat for you today. One of our favorite recurring guests to talk football is back with us today. A guy who watches more football than just about anybody I know, really at all different levels. Fran Stuchbury of OurSportsCentral and other fine outlets. We have talked different levels of football with Fran through a period of time. One thing that has been a constant the last couple of years is talking college football with him, and of course it's that time of year again. This is our bowl season and New Year's Six preview. We're going to get to all that. Of course, there's some fascinating headlines in college football off the field as well right now. So much to talk about. Always a pleasure to do it with you, Fran. Thanks so much for coming back in, my friend.
Hi, Rick. I'm very happy to join you today.
Glad to have you on, and let's get right to it. A lot of stuff off field that has been happening. It seems like the dam burst a little bit early this year when you look at some of the jobs that came open well before the end of the season. I know that my Tennessee Vols, a team that I've long rooted for, pretty much the biggest dumpster fire out of all this, and yet I think they probably came out of it okay in the end from what I'm seeing. I was not a proponent of the Greg Schiano hiring, although I think it was unfair. He got tarred with the Paterno-era stuff, but I just don't like a lot of his other stuff, like challenging Neil Downs and in general being a fake tough guy. So I was not sad to see him gone, but a very, very fraught kind of hiring process there, something that was really awful. It led to the departure of the athletic director. Phil Fulmer comes in. Jeremy Pruitt comes over there. And again, borrowing a page from the book that Georgia went on 2 years ago, Hire a Top Coordinator from the SEC, Jeremy Pruitt seems to have put together a pretty good staff. So is it fair to say that in the end, Tennessee came out of this okay, even after everything that happened and all the black eyes that they suffered leading up to it?
Rick, I think it's fair that Tennessee came out all right. They have a coach, a sentiment coach. He knows how to recruit. He's a quality individual. So many people turned down a job. My inside source told me that you turned down the head coach of Tennessee.
Yeah, it was getting widely offered, Fran. But that was quite a circus that they went through. But we've seen a lot of other things happen too. You always get something unanticipated thrown into the mix every couple of years. A big earthquake that nobody really sees coming. And I think this year it was Jimbo Fisher taking the money, leaving Florida State, which by anybody's definition, there's not anybody in the country that won't tell you that's a more prestigious job than Texas A&M. But money talks. They opened up the billfold to an extent that few other colleges would or could do. They lure him away. You end up bringing the coach from Oregon down there, somebody who'd done a pretty nice one-year turnaround. So Florida State seems to have landed on their feet pretty well, as did Florida with Dan Mullen. A lot of interesting transitions in the Sunshine State.
Definitely a lot of coaching hires. Jim, the question is, Rick, 10 years, $75 million. The question is, in that division, he has to play Alabama, he has to play Auburn, he has to play LSU. I don't see A&M, getting to that level in that tough SEC West. Do you?
It's hard to say. I have to say that again. I think the jury is still out on the hiring of Ed Orgeron at LSU. They seem to have settled for him this time last year. You've always got to be wary when the interim coach ends up being the best that they think they can do. So I wouldn't put it past them to be able to surmount LSU. Certainly the Mississippi schools, I think they've kind of come and gone as far as their moment in the sun. Dan Mullen leaving Mississippi State indicates that. But yes, you still got the big guys. You still got Auburn. You still got Alabama. And oh, by the way, if you make it to the SEC championship game, it looks like Kirby Smart and Georgia is going to be there for as far as the eye can see. So I would tend to agree with you on that, Fran, and that's, one wonders, again, they said they wanted to go longer than 10 years, but Jimbo Fisher wanted to cap it at 10. One wonders if they might start getting a little bit tired of the results here if 5 or 6 years in, and maybe they got one SEC West title to show for it.
He's a good hire, he's a good coach, but everyone's raving about. But the problem is, I think he's in a very tough position. He's going to have to recruit well. The thing is, they can be banned for the next 2 or 3 years, and he's not going to have any job stress. That's
true. That's absolutely true. The honeymoon is going to last out there, as it is a couple of other places, too. Chip Kelly ending up at Westwood here, that's kind of an interesting thing that UCLA, rarely do they make that big of a splash. Ironically, one of the bigger splashes that they'd made with a hire was his predecessor, Jim Mora Jr. It was kind of unusual to see UCLA nab a guy with pro experience. They've sent a couple guys onto the pros. I think Terry Donahue was there before he went to the NFL. But it went the other way around. Jim Mora came in with established NFL bona fides, lasted as long as he did. Now they go for Chip Kelly, who ironically bombed out in the NFL, ultimately in 2 different locations, but has this reputation for being a college genius. It's certainly going to make the battles of Los Angeles that much more interesting, and the Pac-12 as a whole to have him back in there.
Well, Chip Kelly is the originator of the high-power offense. So all these schools of copycats have followed what they've been doing. I think he's perfect. He was smart not to go to Florida. I think he's from. He coached at Oregon. He has West Coast ties. Perfect place for him to be. Another guy I like a lot is Scott Foster from Nebraska, who is in UCF to Nebraska. He played quarterback in Nebraska. The area. I think Nebraska has a chance to be a contender in the Big Ten in a couple seasons.
Absolutely, yeah, and they've certainly got fertile ground to come out of, because you look at Wisconsin and Iowa, a couple of the teams that have come out of the Big Ten West in recent years, coming out undefeated in their own division, only to run into reality in the Big Ten championship game. Nebraska, at the very least, they don't have that challenging of a landscape in terms of their own division. And you're right, Frost is going to have one heck of a honeymoon period for as far as the eye can see there. It's been a very, very interesting season of transitions. You go down a little south from Nebraska to Arkansas, Brett Bielema. That was always, at best, a very interesting experiment, bringing a guy with the whole Midwestern kind of approach here, and the Hogs and power football, bringing him to SEC country the way that it has developed in the modern era. Ultimately, it was unsuccessful with him there. So in terms of that or any of the other job openings we haven't talked about here, what are some of the things that have really caught your eye?
What caught my eye is Dan Mullen going to Florida. I think that's a good hire. I think that's a good move for Florida. You don't have to run a high-power offense. You don't recruit there. I think Florida, in a couple of seasons, they will be a regular contender in the SEC. Some of the other hires that are interesting. You have in the SEC. Mississippi had to settle with their coach because of all those sanctions. Ole Miss.
Yeah, and Mississippi, that might be a case where, in terms of taking the interim guy, that might have been maybe the best move they could do under the circumstances. I'm not generally a fan of that, but a lot of times I'm not a fan of that when it's a bigger program and they can maybe do better. But that guy might be able to cap the damage that's been done in that program in recent years, maybe better than some of these other guys could have. So from the programs, the level of the Mississippi schools, that kind of leads us in here to talk of the minor bowls and slash medium bowls and bowls that, again, schools like that tend to go to, schools from the non-power conferences tend to go to. That's the season we're just getting into now. We're about 2 weeks out as we tape this from the New Year's Six Bowl games, maybe a little bit under 2 weeks in case of the start of those games. Many interesting things that we'll be looking at here. I want to send a shout-out to my fellow FDH Lounge original dignitary, Chris Galloway, who is a fellow Ohio Bobcat, of course, and he had long said if we ever go to the Bahamas Bowl, he will go there to watch. So, Chris, I know you'll be in the house Friday afternoon, and I will be following along with that as much as I can under the circumstances. But when you look at the bowls leading up to the New Year's Six ones, Fran, what are the ones that really kind of catch your eye right now?
In particular is the Arizona Bowl. The Mexico State playing their first bowl game in 57 years against Utah State.
Yes, that's a heck of a story right there, no question about it. And you've really got some interesting matchups as we are wont to get in some of the different bowl games here. And when you look on New Year's Day, for example, in the Citrus Bowl, Notre Dame and LSU, two power programs right there, two programs that had hoped to be potentially in the New Year's Six bowl games, settling just kind of a little bit south of there. Both of them were sort of in it until later in the year, especially Notre Dame. A couple of those losses in November dropped them out of contention for it, but you've got that one there. You've got UCF, who I believe on our college football preview show back in August, you had pegged them to have a pretty good year. They end up going to one of the New Year's Six bowls, the Peach Bowl. We'll get to the New Year's Six games a little bit later on, but some interesting ones here, like in the Liberty Bowl, Iowa State and Memphis squaring off in Memphis. That's kind of an interesting one to me, because you kind of wonder that Memphis is going to have home field advantage, of course, but they don't get to travel for a bowl game. So one wonders in the eyes of the players how they kind of look at something like that.
Another bowl game to take a look at is in the Armed Forces Bowl, Army versus San Diego State. Remember, during our previous show, I said this is because the Army would be Navy and Air Force and get their first Commander-in-Chief trophy since 1996. That game, both teams love to run the football, so if you're a guy, bet the under in that game, because it's going to be a smash mouth run with both those teams.
You did say that. I remember that. That was a very good call on your part. And a couple of interesting matchups as we start getting towards the end of Christmas week, essentially here. Virginia Tech, Oklahoma State. You've got Stanford, TCU, Michigan State, Washington State. Top 25 teams in all three bowl games right there. Certainly, again, that's kind of a rarity when you're looking at the non-major bowls that you'll necessarily get a combination of teams in the top 25. But there are some pretty good matchups this year, those three bowls in particular.
Yeah, those matchups are going to be fun to watch. You have a lot of intrigue in some of these smaller matchups. And then you have matchups in games where coaches are leading, like NC State and Arizona State. You have Graham coaching his last game in Arizona State with the whole entire Herm Edwards firing down there. Yeah,
that in and of itself is very interesting, all the circumstances having to do with that. And then you get some intersectional matchups as well. Kansas State, UCLA, that's another one too, where Chip Kelly's the new coach, but basically kind of observing this from a distance here. So the UCLA players, the ones that are coming back, are sort of auditioning for their new coach. You get the sense in some of these cases where it's being said, it might be kind of a letdown, the coach is leaving, you don't know what kind of an effort you're going to get. But in the case of UCLA, where the new guy's in place, yeah, maybe that's the case for the seniors that are going out the door. But if I'm an underclassman or especially a freshman, I'm going to be playing my butt off just to make sure Chip Kelly takes note.
Yeah, I mean Chip Kelly's going to be watching and wanting to take a look at the younger players and making sure they're on top of the game. They want this game to be committed to perform well and win.
Yeah, that's going to be very important, I think, in terms of the evaluation process and basically, again, seeing who's really bringing it and who's not. As sort of a catch-all for the bowl season, before we start to move into the New Year's Six bowls a little bit here, I know that, again, this is something, I think we've talked about this in the past as well, in terms of players who are not going to be a part of the bowl season, who are essentially, to borrow a term from the world of college basketball and some other things, healthy scratches here. Players who could go but aren't going to go. And there are circumstances, a lot of times, you could make a case, and I think a very good case, for the selfishness in it and for everything that they are getting. But I think there is a cautionary tale as well. In particular, you look at Jake Butt, what he suffered in Michigan's bowl game previously, and what ended up happening to his draft position, the way that he kind of tumbled there. And I think players are probably looking at that as well. So kind of a complicated issue there, and certainly a very controversial one in terms of a lot of people viewing the players as being very entitled.
Well, we have been at the Las Vegas Bowl. West Freeman, the running back, decides to skip the game and prep the NFL, and he's on the sideline trying to get the players motivated. That's embarrassing. Go focus on the NFL. Not a crystal ball. A guy that coaches all the players wanted there said they're looking for a better coach. That was the first big mistake he made as a head coach.
Yeah, I think so. And ultimately, yeah, you can't have one foot in the door and one foot out the door. And if that's going to be somebody's approach, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a negative thing of, get out of here if that's the way you're going to do it. But yeah, 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out the door, that doesn't do anything to help your teammates who are only able to count on you for moral support when, quite frankly, they're looking for more than that from you. So we get into the New Year's Six bowl games, and we open with one that is going to be a real doozy, one that has been a traditional Rose Bowl classic many times in the past, happened a couple of times back in the 70s. This is evoking echoes of Woody Hayes and Earl Bruce here in the Midwest, and specifically America's North Coast where I'm sitting, with number 5 Ohio State and number 8 USC going head-to-head here. And that is going to be a game where, again, the Buckeyes have really been kind of up and down all year. I say this as somebody who has watched all the games. My dad's a season ticket holder, so I've even been there in person. And again, you never know what you're going to get from this team, largely because you never know what you're going to get from J.T. Barrett on any given day. I will say also, too, on the other sideline, a little bit more inconsistency this year from Sam Darnold as he tumbles from being the certain number 1 pick in the draft to just a probable or a maybe one at this point. I, as a Cleveland Browns fan, I guess I'm in the minority of Browns fans these days, still licking my chops at the notion of Sam Darnold being out there, but all the Browns fans who are also Ohio State fans, and there's a complete overlap on the Venn diagram, will be watching with great interest what happens in that game with Sam Darnold and what USC is going to bring against Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl.
I'm leaning towards Ohio State because their coach always, Urban Meyer, gets them motivated to play and perform. He can he wants to show people that they deserve to be in that playoff, not Alabama. Yeah,
certainly the motivation is going to be there, no doubt about it. Urban Meyer always gets the best out of his team in terms of that. I kind of agree with you on that one there. I think they are going to rise to the occasion. In the Fiesta Bowl, this is an interesting one. Another Pac-12 Big Ten matchup here between number 12 Washington and number 9 Penn State. And again, a couple of teams that had aspirations of being in the playoff this year. I think I had both of them in there, if I remember correctly. I may have had USC in instead of Washington. But I know I had Penn State in there, and they were very close to being in there. They hang on against Ohio State, and their season looks a little bit different. So for two teams that were shooting a little bit higher than this, the New Year's Six Bowls are still something that are, I think, greatly valued by programs for the amount of money that's involved for the programs. There's a lot of prestige to it as well. So how do you see this one shaking out?
I like Penn State in this one simply because they are top 10 on offense and defense. And Saquon Barkley, the scouts can be looking at him. That can end up making him go further up in the first round of the NFL draft.
That's right. He's a unicorn. He's one of these running backs who is going to go much higher than backs generally go in the draft, sort of what Leonard Fournette was able to do as well. Those guys don't come along very often. Referring back to my own predictions on this, I just checked it, and I agree with you on the second one here. I agree with you on Penn State. I think they're going to win. I think they're going to cover. In the Orange Bowl, a home game for the number 11 Miami Hurricanes as they take on number 6 Wisconsin. An interesting line to me, Wisconsin coming in on the road, and it's been hovering right around a touchdown that they've been spotting. It's right about 6.5 at the moment now. A little bit counterintuitive, again, when you go back to them being the winners of the pretty weak Big Ten West Division, and then ultimately they stood up pretty well against Ohio State, but in the end were unable to stay undefeated. Miami, I don't know, maybe it's the way that they got bounced thoroughly in a couple of their games, particularly by Clemson, that kind of made people take notice here. And I guess it wasn't really a rout at the hands of Pittsburgh, but it was a disappointing loss nonetheless. So maybe it's the loss of luster Miami suffered down the stretch that's making them fairly significant underdogs at home. But again, they were in a fairly weak division in the ACC as well. But what's your scenario when you look at this game?
Well, I think Wisconsin. I like Wisconsin's game. I feel there's more motivation factor there. And also Miami, they're playing at home. There's not the motivation. If this game was in another city, I think there'd be more motivation for Miami. But Miami is skated by most of the season, surviving on last-second wins and holding on. And now they're playing a team from the Big Ten who has 6 weeks to get ready to play Smash Mouth football like they have been doing all season. I think like Ohio State, both Wisconsin is dedicated to showing people that that they deserve to be a top 14.
Well, yeah, and I tell you what, that's a good point. I do have Miami covering in this game, although not necessarily to win, but that's an excellent point as far as when you look at the job Wisconsin has done with Paul Chryst there, and that, again, the Big Ten has had some flashy hires in recent seasons. Urban Meyer, he's had a lot of success. Jim Harbaugh, mixed at best through 3 seasons, and that might be a little bit kind. But it's been some of the lower profile guys who've really kind of done well. Chryst coming in there doing well. James Franklin was considered to be a solid hire coming over from Vanderbilt, but he has really delivered big time as well. So both Penn State and Wisconsin being featured on the same day, December 30th, in the New Year's 6 games. We skip over the 31st as that is a Sunday this year. That's when we would normally get the first couple of games in the New Year's 6, but with the NFL, we skip right ahead to Monday, and you've got the Peach Bowl in there. It is the last one of the non-playoff games, number 10 UCF, number 7 Auburn, and referring back to what I said a second ago here about the Big Ten and flashy hires, once again, Scott Frost going to Nebraska. Everybody's kind of licking their chops there, and rightfully so. The hometown guy who has gone off, done well, did a miracle in turning around UCF in 2 years, and this will be the last hurrah of the era that he built at UCF against an Auburn team that, again, I think this is a classic example of, I'm not necessarily saying there's going to be a letdown, but Auburn's the kind of team that lets down in this spot. They were really, really hoping to be in the national championship picture here. And they go to the Peach Bowl. It's still a good spot to be in for them. There's still prestige to it. The program managed to hang on to Gus Malzahn even after Arkansas came knocking with a lot of money. But it'll be interesting to see because, the UCF guys also potentially, I guess there could be a letdown. But they have a perfect season in front of them. They have a chance to do what nobody else can do at this point, and that's to end the year with a 0 in the loss column. So it will be very interesting to see the motivations on both sides.
Well, I think Auburn will win this game, but I think UCF has a chance to talk the spread. The thing is, you have to look at the schedules where Auburn played a brutal-esque schedule, and UCF did not have that challenge. If Auburn didn't have those back-to-back brutal games, if they had Georgia early in the season, if they didn't have the brutal schedule towards the end of the season, they probably would have made the top 4.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. That SEC West, I think we saw late in the year with some of the losses, really the round robin in terms of the matchups between Auburn, Georgia, and Alabama here, that whether it be the Iron Bowl, whether it be the SEC championship game, whether it be the Auburn-Georgia game prior to that the real meat grinder late in the season of the top teams in the SEC kind of wearing each other down. And, they have a chance to get fresh here. We're going to talk about that as it relates to the nightcap of the playoff games as well, because people seem to be factoring that into a decent degree. But we lead off with the Rose Bowl, and if you look at the history of the Rose Bowl, Big Ten, Pac-12, an extraordinarily unlikely matchup because neither of those conferences are represented here, but of course that's because this is the year for the college football semifinal game, and it is number 3 Georgia against number 2 Oklahoma, and this is one where Georgia has been fairly consistently a very, very, very narrow favorite, a point or two right along the way here. I have to tell you that I'm kind of going against the grain a little bit, that I like Oklahoma because I think with the explosiveness of that offense, with Baker Mayfield, with everything that they can bring, people are questioning them defensively, and I kind of get that, and that's the rep that a lot of Big 12 schools have to begin with. But I think Oklahoma is going to be able to hang, and I think, believe it or not, they may in this matchup be more solid on both sides of the ball than Georgia collectively. So how do you see this first one shaking out?
Well, I also agree with you. I also like Oklahoma in the game, despite everyone saying that Georgia's going to run crazy over Oklahoma's defense. But the problem is, I'm not convinced Georgia's quarterback to win them that game and make the critical throws that are necessary. Baker Mayfield can for
He has. He's been a big-time college quarterback. I get a little bit nervous when I hear how much John Dorsey likes him, as I'm not looking for any part of Johnny Manziel Part 2 with the Browns. But moving ahead to the nightcap with the Sugar Bowl, it's number 1 Clemson against number 4 Alabama, what is slated for an 8:45 kickoff, which means that we should just about be wrapping this thing up at 1 a.m. on January 2nd. I'm sure we're all going to be thrilled to go back to work the next day with that being the case. But this is one where Alabama has been a fairly short favorite all along here, 2 to 2.5 points. And looking at it, and again, referencing back to what we talked about just a short while ago as far as the SEC, the power teams in the conference, the great teams, the meat grinder of playing each other late in the year, and everything like that. People are, I think, making some assumptions here, and perhaps justifiably so, about the health of Alabama at this point, that they're going to be in better shape, get back some of the guys that were so ruinous for them not to have in the Iron Bowl, and that they're going to be able to go out there with more of a full contingent than we had seen from them in recent weeks here. But again, I'm going to go against the grain a little bit. I'm going with the defending national champions in this one. This is the rubber match. They've met in the last 2 national championship games. This is sort of the Cavs Warriors of NCAA football, except for the fact that this time they're meeting in the semifinal game. I think it's going to be a battle all the way to the finish. I think it may be another all-time classic like what we saw last year. But again, I think Clemson has just been maybe the most complete team in the country all season long. I think the way that Kelly Bryant has stepped up at quarterback there, filled those shoes. That was the biggest question about Clemson coming into the year, was what was the offense going to look like without the great Deshaun Watson. The answer has been almost as good. With that being the case, I'm going to go Clemson here.
Well, I also agree with you, Rick, on this. I think Clemson is going to win this game. Alabama wants something to prove, but I think Clemson is a more complete team. But it's going to be a very close game. And I'll be honest with you, for the Bowl Mania people that are playing that, neither of these games where I pick these wins with high confidence points, because they're both going to be close toss-up games.
They are, and I don't remember in past years off the top of my head, but I don't remember the line being as close on both games as in here. Like, I know, like, I think it was 2 years ago when Alabama played Michigan State. They were a fairly significant favorite, I believe. Like, there's been at least 1 or 2 games along the way here, I think, where the line's been a little bit more inflated. Alabama was probably a decent favorite over Washington last year, but to have both of these games at the present time that we're taping inside of a field goal, yeah, it's on a neutral field, but that is still truly remarkable to have. So you move past that, you move to the national championship game on what would be Monday, December 8th, with these two teams meeting up again in the new Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta there, the nice new football stadium that they have. Ironically, one of the few times in that football stadium that the Chick-fil-A concession stands will be open, as they are not open for most Falcons games, since most Falcons games are on Sundays, but they'll be open on this Monday night for all the hungry people there to chow down on their delicious Chick-fil-A. And in the national championship, you and I are both picking Clemson to be back for a 3rd consecutive year. You and I are both saying Oklahoma to be there. We talked about it a second ago here in terms of 2 years ago. You had Alabama, Michigan State in the Cotton Bowl in the semifinals. The other semifinal game, of course, that year was in the Orange Bowl, where it was a really good game for about 2.5 quarters. People remember it as sort of being a Clemson blowout, but it was more that they pulled away decisively late. It was a really good game well into the 3rd quarter, as I remember it. I think it's going to be a really good game all the way through here, but going back to a word you and I both used, complete, I think Clemson's the most complete team in the country. You've already said that. That's going to drive my pick here. Clemson to repeat as national champions.
I'm also going to agree with you with that. Clemson to repeat. I'm sorry, folks. We didn't rehearse this. we both have similar opinions. Because I think Clemson is the most complete team, and they are going to repeat and be national champions.
I think so. And it'll be really interesting to see, because this is really sort of a distancing that Clemson has done from the pack, first and foremost in the ACC. I mean, again, for many, many years, there was that intense, and it's still a big rivalry with them and Florida State. Going back to when it was the Bowden Bowl, it was a big rivalry. But in recent years, the way that Clemson has kind of pulled away, now Florida State is in flux. It may take them a year or so to get their feet back under them, losing Jimbo Fisher very suddenly, although Willie Taggart's a heck of a coach as well, so maybe it won't. But they've pulled away in the ACC. You're right there in the heart of ACC country, of course, presently, and they've established themselves as a national power. If they win this, they're absolutely on par with Alabama. We think of Alabama as the kingpin, whether they're the defending champions or not. You put Clemson right alongside of them if it's 3 consecutive national championship appearances and 2 consecutive national championships. And what I'm wondering is, Dabo Swinney being a good guy, everybody likes him. There's been really no heat kind of coming their way throughout all of this. How long does Clemson become sort of the default team you root for? Like, most people would root for them against Alabama. Most people don't think of them as sort of the New York Yankees yet. How long till that changes and we all start kind of turning on them for being too successful?
I think until Alabama starts losing, because I compare Alabama to the New England Patriots, that people hate them and want to root against them.
Yep.
But I mean, Clemson is they're pretty clean. They don't have anything going on. Years ago, they used to lose teams, and the term Clemsoning happened. Now they beat the teams, on a regular basis, and you're popular. I mean, everybody hates Alabama. That's just what I see on social media, Rick.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And, as long as they're the bulwark against Alabama getting over the top, I think you're right about that. I think that they're going to be the team that everybody kind of looks at and doesn't mind their success. If it's a 3rd national championship in a row next year, maybe that starts to change. But for right now, being the anti-Alabama is suiting them perfectly, even though being the anti-Alabama has meant matching the success of Alabama in the last 2 seasons with a national championship and a runner-up spot, the exact same record in the last 2 years as Alabama in terms of success, a chance to distance themselves from Alabama over a 3-year span based on what happens in the Sugar Bowl and subsequently. But yeah, these games, the playoff games, are going to be magical to watch. I am really looking forward to it. Bowl season as a whole is pretty fun. It's fun watching a lot of these different games. Looking forward to watching my alma mater out there. Looking forward to watching a bunch of these different ones. I know you will be eyeballing them all intensely, Fran, and that's the reason we love breaking the stuff down with you. Like I said, you watch more football and just about more intently than just about anybody I know. So enjoy the season, my friend. All the best to you. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and all of that. Enjoy the football, and thank you for being on with us today.
Thanks, Rick. I think you should continue using your Bobby Roode theme music, because every podcast you do, wait for it, glorious.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm a big Bobby Roode guy, so I can really appreciate that. Thank you very much for that, Fran. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to FDH Lounge Mini episode number 930.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and the Periodic Table of Elements.